Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Allison Gampel, Associate Director of Alumni Programs here at York University, and I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you in the audience. Thank you and welcome to this special event. It's not every day that our Alumni Book Club reads a book by one of our own. We are honored that Jesse Thistle, award-winning author of From the Ashes, My Story of Being Métis, Homeless, and Finding My Way, will be here with us in just a few moments, along with our esteemed Dean of Libraries, Joy Kirshner. If you are not already a member, please visit York's Alumni and Friends website and join our book club to participate further. Although we aren't all in the same location, we recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Today's event is brought to you by the Alumni Engagement Team in partnership with York University's libraries. Even in these times, York libraries remain among the busiest libraries in North America through their online offerings. They help our students navigate, evaluate, and cite information sources for assignments and projects through on-demand and appointment-based services. They also work with our professors on research data management and digital literacies. The libraries have increased their digital resources and currently provide curbside pickup service for items only available in print. Libraries is also preparing for a major renovation of the Scott Library, as well as the new construction of a library in our exciting Markham campus that's about to launch. I'd like to offer some special welcomes first to York's Indigenous Alumni Network. This is a group of alumni volunteers who help Indigenous students and alumni to remain connected and engaged with each other and the university. The network works closely with York's Centre for Aboriginal Student Services and the Aboriginal Students Association of York, ASA, organizations that our distinguished author knew well in his time as a student. The Indigenous Alumni Network is co-chaired by three wonderful alumni, Crystal Abadasawe, Janine Manning, and Dave Smith. Learn more about this program at the Alumni and Friends website. Onto a bit of housekeeping. If you need help with Zoom, please use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. The same Q&A button will also be used to submit your questions to our author that I will read on your behalf. For those of you watching live on Facebook, please feel free to submit any questions or comments through the video's comment section, and our background team will send them my way. So before we begin our fireside chat, I'd like to take a quick poll to get a sense of who's here. So I'd like to know, and you'll see it pop up on your screen, have you ever attended a York University alumni event, online or in person? So it's popping up on our screen. We see the responses coming in. I'll give you all a moment or two to respond. It's looking like about half of you have been to events before. It's almost split down the middle with just over half of you having been here before. So welcome back and welcome to all newcomers to alumni events. It's wonderful to have you all. Thank you so much. While we wish we could see you in person, this definitely helps us understand who's here. I'd like now to welcome our Dean of Libraries, Joy Kirshner, who will host the fireside chat. and alumnus Jesse Thistle, a York University Ph.D. student, assistant professor, and author of From the Ashes. It's a true honor to have you both here with us. And I'm pleased, once the cameras turn on, to hand the conversation over to you, Joy, to introduce Jesse and kick things off. Thank you.
Okay, just a little bit of a technical issue with my video camera. Sorry about that. Thank you, Allison, for having me today. It is truly a great pleasure to be here and an honor to have a conversation with Jesse. In welcoming our guest, I would like to share a little bit about him. Author and alumnus Jesse Thistle's Métis-Cree from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. He is assistant professor of Métis Studies at York and a Ph.D. candidate in history. He won a Governor General's Academic Medal in 2016 and is a Pierre Elliot Trudeau Scholar and a Vanier Scholar, and his award-winning memoir, From the Ashes, is #1 national bestseller, a CBC Canada Reads finalist, and an Indigo Best Book of 2019. Close to my heart, though, I also need to mention, Jesse, and remind you perhaps that you also won the Dr. James Wu Prize for Best Project as an undergraduate, as a participant in the Libraries and Vice President of Research and Innovations co-sponsored undergraduate research event, and that was in 2016. So that was memorable for all of us. The memoir we will discuss today details how his issues with abandonment and addiction led to homelessness, incarceration, and his eventual redemption through higher education. It is an exploration into the impact of prejudice and racism, revealing a story about hope, resilience, and a man who refused to give up. I'm so very pleased to be moderating this fireside chat and honored to be introducing our guest today. Jesse, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for introducing me. It's nice to see you again. I haven't seen you in a while, and I'm just glad to come and talk about stuff with you.
Thank you, Jesse. And I think it's a testament to this fantastic turnout that everybody's very interested in hearing your story. So I'll begin. Can you tell us what led to you to decide to write your own personal story as a published memoir?
Yeah, I am an accidental author. I see myself more as an academic, and my grades and all the awards, like that's a small list of the stuff that I won when I was at York as an undergrad. It caught media attention when I graduated because no one had done that before, won the Governor General and those 2 doctoral awards in 1 month. And so the Toronto Star came to do a story just on my academic success. And when I talked to him, he found out that I was Indigenous, which made it rarer, I guess. And then he asked me how I got to university. I said, well, it kind of started when I robbed a store, when I was on the streets. And he was like, we're gonna write a story about that. And so he put a story out, and a couple of days later, I got a call from an editor at Simon & Schuster named Adria, or a PR person, sorry, she's not an editor. And they asked me to go in and talk to them about the potential of doing a book. And I didn't even know what Simon & Schuster was, And so I went in just to hear them out, and they asked me if I had anything written about my life. And I had been doing what's called my AA 4th step. So really trying to figure out my addiction. I'm a former crack addict and alcoholic. And part of me being sober is really working through my past to make sense of it and writing it down. And so I'd been doing that since I graduated in 2009 from rehab, all the way up until when I graduated in 2016. And so I sent them all those basically written on cue cards, and then I put it on a blog. And they called me back a little while later and offered me a major book contract. So really I didn't think anybody was going to read those AA steps that I had worked through. And so I'm like a serendipitous, accidental author. And I know other authors hate me because they write manuscripts and shop them around for years, but it just didn't happen like that for me, and I was asked, that's why I wrote the book.
Thank you, Jesse. I was also really struck by the construction of your memoir and your use of poetry. I think that so beautifully encapsulated the emotional and often symbolic crux of your life journey. Which came first, the poetry or the narrative? Was that part of the blog and your story?
The poems
Yeah,
came
the poem.
first. So,
Yeah.
especially the love poem that I wrote to Lucy. I wrote it when I was in rehab. Me and her started talking the day that my grandmother died, and she kind of sent me a message of consolation. And we just started chatting, and I think she was just trying to be a nice person. And I remembered her from my youth, so I started sending her love poems because I was basically incarcerated in rehab. That was my court-ordered sentence. It was a minimum security place. And so I started like that. And then I kept writing poems, and she kept encouraging me. And I was like, hey, I'm okay at this, you know? And a part of expressing myself was through these poems while I was reteaching myself how to read and write. And so it was also an avenue for me to grasp the English language again, you know, because after years of addiction and just not using that, it kind of fell away. And and so some of them are really crude, I guess. They're not very poetic, but they're my poem and my journey in literacy.
Thank you, Jesse. Uh, as a reader, there were so many haunting moments that have stayed with me, and I'm just, I think we're all curious to hear what were the most difficult moments in chapters of the book to write and share, and you spoke so honestly about them, and I'm just curious to hear your journey.
The hardest ones are the moments where I realize that I broke people's hearts. Because like I think of all the things that I did in my life, if when I meet my maker, when I'm in front of God or whatever it is, I'll be judged for those crimes. You know, I think they're the only real true crimes that I did. When you break someone's heart, you can't put it back together again, you know, and they're broken. You know, I did that to my grandmother, my grandfather, my brothers. I did that to Karen, the girl, Samantha, you know, and so I have to make amends for that. And I don't think I can, uh, in this realm of existence, make that right. I've tried. Um, so that bothers me even today, even just to talk about it, I get like really kind of upset, but like the violence of it was easy to write about, you know, the things that I physically went through, those heal, right? Like I might have a lot of broken bones and scars and stuff, but like ultimately it's those hearts. And then beyond that, I think it was the murder trial, because I have complex PTSD for standing up for justice and, you know, doing the right thing. You'd be surprised when you stand up for justice in the moment how much the masses will attack you, you know, around you, for doing the right thing, because usually those situations are so volatile that people are just emotionally invested. And so like that was the moment that all my street family turned on me and they hunted me and tried to kill me. And so that was hard. And then the early stuff with my dad was really difficult to work through, because I had to talk with my brothers about it. And I could see that they weren't healed in a lot of ways. And so I tried to represent that as best I could. But it was, that was difficult. Yeah.
I was so struck by your forthright honesty and how you were so respectful. There wasn't blame in your story. And I'm just curious if you'd like to comment about that.
Sure. Addictions is driven by ego usually, and it's driven by resentment of ego. So you feel that someone has wronged you, and then that you have, you know, some people do have the right to hold that within them, and then that poisons them. That creates hate, you know, real hate. And for a long time, I even wrote a poem about it. I was like a beast lost in resentments, because literally my world had been taken away from me multiple times. my heart had been broken. I died on the streets, I think, like thousands of times, had my hearts broken. And so I was very angry for a long, long time. But that just kept me mired in my addiction. And it wasn't until I got better and I started working through forgiveness, trying to like understand people's motivations, what was driving me, that I came to see like, oh, we were all just people doing the best that we could, given the circumstances in front of us. And like when you understand people's life histories and why they're doing stuff and their motivations, like really understand, then that resentment falls away, you know? And so I wrote it from that lens. I'm sure if I wrote the book in 2011 or 10, when I was working through a lot of this stuff, the tone of it would have been different. But because I had more distance in sobriety and I matured spiritually and emotionally, that it came across. And I could just tell the story without being accusatory or resentful. And I think that really resonates with people because they can relate, they can see all the different players in my life and how we're all just caught up in this, together.
Yes, it was, I think, a lot of lessons, and it was so striking that was the way that you expressed your story. In your book, you shared thoughts about potentially quitting your undergrad journey at York. And I wondered how much your wife, Lucy Thistle, who's also your grad, helped you continue. And since they're on the Zoom, many of us are connected with York, we're all connected with York. I'm wondering if you could also share if there was something at York, either the resources, spaces, or people that were also helpful to you.
Sure. I got to York University on a promise to my grandmother, right? When she was dying, I made a promise that I would go back to school, give it my all. But then when I got out of rehab, I just worked and did construction and just tried to live. And so it was Lucy, actually, when I moved in with her, that she kind of kicked my butt. She's like, I'm not going to let you forget that promise, Jesse. You're going to have to honor that because you'll never forgive yourself. And so when I got to York, I was an old guy. I was like grandpa, 35 years old, and all the kids were so young. They were like 18 to 20, 25. And so, and they were way smarter, right? They had literacy above me. Their parents had bought them all like laptops and smartphones. And here I am showing up with pen and paper, just like it's the 90s, right? Because that's where I left off in my life. And so I was afraid. I was terrified that everybody was smarter than me and nobody wanted to talk to me. And the whole first year was like that. The whole first year was this anxiety, like I'm some alien that doesn't belong. I was studying war history. And so, because I've always loved World War I and II, researching the history. And in my first year, Lucy was in her master's at York, and she kind of coached me through. She's like, it's okay, this is how mature students feel. And it was actually Lucy that connected me with the Indigenous community at York University. She went up to CAS, it's the Center for Aboriginal Student Services at York, and she dragged me up there and she introduced me to a man named Randy Pequannoquet. He's the director, and she's like, you have to be with your people, Jesse. This is the only way you're going to stick it out. And so I started going there and started feeling like I belonged somewhere. And I could see that there were other older Indigenous students like me with similar backgrounds, and we kind of formed a fellowship there in York Lanes. And then they pulled me into ASA. I became the president there. That's the Aboriginal Student Services at York. I started running powwows and I found a home. I found a real home. And I met wonderful people like Dr. Carolyn Pedruchny, an expert in Métis history, who recognized very early on in my academic journey the talent that was there. I might not have had the skills, but I did have talent to learn. And she kind of walked me through a reconnection of my family and history through secondary and primary literature that she was introducing to me, along with Dr. Victoria Freeman, who was a lecturer there as well. And so, yeah, York in a lot of ways re-indigenized me. I know historically these institutions, they took away indigeneity And we're in a different era. It's like the post-truth and reconciliation era, where we're helping foster senses of identity through academics, and like York was a huge part of that, and I'm very thankful. But I want people to know that it was Lucy that had the connection in the Indigenous community first, not me.
Thank you. This is a perfect segue to my next question. The role of identity is a major theme of your book. How did embracing your Métis-Cree heritage help you set a course for the life you wanted?
Well, it was everything. It was, I was resentful of my mom, and she's Métis-Cree from northern Saskatchewan, the road allowances. And so we didn't really talk for many years. And so part of me reconnecting with my identity through academics was reconnecting and forging a relationship with her and my aunties. And Carolyn Produchny, a historian, actually flew me out on a shirk grant to meet them again after, like, I don't know, 20 years, 25 years of not seeing them. And yeah, it was beautiful. I was terrified when I got in the plane, and I was her RA. So I would have to transcribe and, take pictures and do like a photo log and stuff. But really, it was like a long extended road trip with my mom and my family to reconnect me. And it's actually an Indigenous methodology to reconnect kin. So she's following an Indigenous protocol just through a Western lens. And so when I went to the barbecue to meet with my mom and her family, they had an empty chair there for me, and there was nothing to be afraid of. They were waiting for me to come home, And so it was beautiful. And I thank York University for that, because like without that, I would never have had the resources to do that. And we would have never reconnected. And now we talk all the time. And I'm learning that it's to be Indigenous is actually to be a part of the community. It's, you have to have the biology, of course, but it's also about like how you act within community and help other people. And yeah, it's that was all done through York, and I'm very thankful for Carolyn and for the research officer for letting us do that.
That's fantastic. You also wrote very eloquently about past life visions that seem to be heightened at critical moments throughout your book. And I've wondered how these connections that you were thinking through in your journey were also instrumental in driving you.
Yeah. Like my interest in World War I and that history was really about like that vision that I had. Like when I was dying, I had septic shock in my foot from a staphylococci infection. I had a surgery on my calcaneus, that's your heel, rebuilding, and it got really infected because I was using drugs and wasn't listening to the doctor's advice. And so I had this vision where, like, I didn't know it at the time, the western door is where the ancestors live, right? And this giant herd of horses came all across the plains, and they were pulling me away, from my body, basically because I was being an idiot and I wasn't doing the work that was set before me in my life. And so before that vision came to me, I had this vision that I was in this trench, and it just always fascinated me, this war history. And I heard sometime later, I gave a talk last year at York University, and a lady was there named Shoshona. She's in the group Digging Roots. And she was on stage, and she said that vision actually is probably representative of the front lines of colonialism, because really World War I was the eruption of global colonialism internalizing itself in Europe, right? That's what Germany and they were all really fighting for. Who is going to be the supreme colonial overlord? And so me in that moment in my vision was really representative of me being homeless on the front lines of colonialism here in Canada. That's the front lines of colonialism. They're the people that are affected most by intergenerational trauma, dispossession, loss of language, identity, and whatnot. And so that's what that vision meant to me. And it propelled me to go to university for war history. And then when I got there, the other half of the vision started making sense. The white church, the Batoche church that I saw, that's actually a church that existed, and I didn't know about Batoche. before I had that vision. And so that's where my family fought against the government and, fought for our land. We lost, and that's how we became dispossessed. So it had really, really deep meaning. And then my grandparents' house, the number 8, it turned on its side, and I didn't know it then. That's the Métis flag, and I was raised under that symbol. And so all these things started to make sense now that I have like historical training, but in the moment that when it happened, it made no sense. And so I wrote what I went through and tried to give that discombobulated feeling that I had to.
Yes, and that was amazing to read about that, and just hearing how you're describing that connection is very powerful. Thank you.
Yeah.
You also write a lot about the theme of hunger, both literal and metaphorical, as a major theme that sort of shapes your journey. Is there anything that you would want the readers to understand about the driving force of hunger? And I don't mean just physical hunger, but all kinds of hunger.
Yeah, I believe that my addiction turned me into what's called a Wendigo. So a Wendigo is something a long time ago, Native people in times of hard winters would, some people devour their families. They would eat they practice cannibalism because the trap line was so scarce. And so a lot of modern indigenous thinkers and writers have theorized that like alcoholism and like addictions are that same operation of like cannibalizing yourself, right? Because you're hungering for love, you're hungering for acceptance, you're hungering for community, identity, all those things that were taken from me. And so that's one kind of hunger. And then the other is the actual physical hunger. Like I have a really messed up relationship to food. Even now, I'm just now starting to lose weight and getting back in shape because for years I just didn't have access to food the same way that other people did. And that started when I was very, very young and continued all the way through my life. And so when I finally leveled out in 2011, 12, 13, I just went to town on everything. I ate everything, right? Because, it's like people when they win the lottery, if they're poor, they just go crazy, right? Because they've never had it and they don't know how to manage that. And so I'm just coming to terms with that now. I've lost 30 pounds. And so it's, and it's nice to have a good relationship with food where it's a healthy thing. So.
Thank you. We're also living in very interesting times with this pandemic. I'm just wondering if you have thoughts about its effects on the Indigenous people, rehabilitation, homelessness, and whether you have thoughts about how we can best provide support or educate ourselves more in these times in relation to Indigenous people or rehabilitation or homelessness.
Yeah, homeless people are, again, like I said, right on the front lines of what's happening. And so a lot of the injustices around overcrowding has been revealed through this. And governments acted. They rented out hotels, sequestered them, and then put homeless people in rooms to socially space them so there would be low rates of transmission in the shelter system. And they did this. They didn't do this out of benevolence. They did this because they were afraid that homeless people would be vectors for disease and reinfect the middle class. And so that's really important to note. Beyond that, I know that rehabs, rehabilitation centers, most of them have closed, right? And so addicts are really at risk right now because the border's closed, and what dealers have done is they've polluted their drug sources, and it's led to really, really high rates of overdosing all across the country. I think April was the highest level of overdosing ever in Canada because of this phenomenon where dealers are trying to get the same weight and sell the product and to make their money, but they're making it really toxic for addicts. And then there's nowhere for addicts to go to come off of drugs because all those centers are closed. And so it's like the perfect storm that's led to a whole bunch of deaths and injustices, and it's just hasn't been covered in the news because no one really cares about addicts, really, if you think about it. It's more of a, I'm not saying it's a story that shouldn't get primacy, but like we've covered the deaths of old people, but we're not covering the out of control overdoses that are happening as well. And that's like a political issue. And so for Indigenous people um, who are majority homeless, who are dealing with addictions, by consequence, they're in the thick of the storm just because they already had really high numbers before the pandemic, and now it's translating into them being exposed more than anybody else. And so, and those are urban people, home communities. I know, like Six Nations, other First Nations across the country, they closed their borders, and they were among the first communities that declared to be COVID free because they had the right to shut off their borders. And I really believe that they were in the right to do that. I know that caused some controversy, but so that's what I know about how COVID has affected Indigenous people.
Thank you, Jesse. I know that our our participants here have many questions for you, but before I turn over the floor over to Allison to ask the questions on behalf of our guests, can I ask one last one, and that is, what's next for you?
What's next for me? I'm doing a book of poetry right now.
Nice.
And we're in negotiation. My agent is with Simon & Schuster, so it's going to be a major release. I hope it's going to be like Rupi Kaur poem level, like go like huge. But like I'm not holding my breath. I'm also writing a book about my great uncle, Ron. He was a professional bank robber, and his story is really the damage that residential schools did to Indigenous men, particularly, and how they recaptured toxic masculinity through asserting their agency in like really destructive ways through becoming a bank robber, because nobody tells a bank robber what to do. Their manhood, a lot of them were stolen in those schools when they were young boys. And so I'm going to write about that. And it's an advocacy piece because he's still in Joyceville. He's been DO'd. He's never getting out. And I want people to question whether he actually is a criminal, or is he a product of the state, the way that our lands were taken and our people were damaged. And so, and then I'm also writing a mini series for my book, From the Ashes. We're hoping to sell it to HBO or Netflix. We're in negotiations right now. We wanted to do a feature film, but apparently you get a wider audience through these miniseries because everybody binge watches at home now. And so we're going that direction. And I have a meeting with the producers next week. And yeah, so a lot going on. And I have to do my dissertation. So yeah.
Jesse, that is stunning. I'm so delighted to hear all of this. I loved your poetry. And
Thank
the
you.
story just lends itself. It just lends itself. I could see it visually on screen. So I am going to hand it over to Allison now, because we have many questions from our audience. So thank you,
Thank you
very much, Jesse. It was an honor and a pleasure speaking with you.
I want to reiterate that thank you to you, Jesse, for being with us and sharing with us, and thank you to Joy for participating and moderating our fireside chat. We do have questions that are coming in, and I will ask you, Jesse, to answer those questions that the audience has. So for our audience, if you're watching on Zoom, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. And for those of you who are on Facebook, please submit your questions using the comment box for this video. Okay, so let's get started, Jesse, on some of the questions that have come in. And the first one that I would like to ask comes in from Elizabeth. So Elizabeth, thank you for your question. Elizabeth asks, Jesse, what are some of the biggest life lessons you've learned in your journey thus far? Are there any important tips for others who are going through similar circumstances?
Yeah, I learned that home is love. Home is love. Like, and I wrote a whole definition about the importance of connection to rehome Indigenous peoples, but that also applies to other people as well. I really do believe that. And so I had like the love of my wife, the love of the good people that were all connected to her, my mother-in-law, Liba, the Siriano family that gave me a place to stay when I was doing my undergrad and my master's, and like the wraparound love of just those people kind of got me better. You know, it changed who I was, and so that lesson really was hard won. Like I spent my whole young life from when I was a child all the way up through till I was in my 30s, hungering for love and not being brave enough to open my heart to that. And then when it came to me again, I knew what the value of that was. And it gave me a second chance at life, you know? And so that's probably the most important lesson. And then beyond that, I would say that the opposite of addiction is human connection. Human connection. It's not a sobriety. A lot of people think that. It's not. Like, you know, you could be sober for 20 years and still just repeat the same day over and over of drugless or alcoholless, over and over, and you're called, it's white knuckling it. You're not getting better. It's through human connection, human love, and, you know, learning to trust again that you actually do get better. And that takes a long time. And since then, I've read a lot of literature around trauma and addiction through Dr. Gabor Mate, and he also believes the same thing. And he worked in the Lower East Side in Vancouver, where they have horrendous rates of addiction. So it's really about connection and love, and that's what brings us closer into the circle.
Absolutely. Not to be cliche, but I love that you said that. And that leads to a question that came in from Diane. So thank you, Diane, for your question. Diane said, you're so right that people don't care about addicts. She just recently had the same thought in a discussion group where she mentioned that people don't care. And she's wondering, how do we promote a culture of caring? And to add on, how do we enable that connection?
Well, I think that like the avenue into the discussion is if we break down economics, right? So everybody listens and understands that they pay their tax dollars and a certain amount goes to jail and whatever. So I think it's $1,500 to keep someone who's cycling into the justice system in jail from addiction. 80% of people in jail are there for addiction issues, right? They broke the law to feed their habit or whatever. And so, and I think it's like, I don't know, $500 a night to keep them in rehab. And so like, and rehab has a finite end to it. If someone goes to rehab and gets better, then they're rehabilitated, hopefully, and they go on to become tax-paying citizens. Where if you just keep punitively putting people in jail and punishing them for their addiction, then they're going to perpetually cost the taxpayer $1,500 a night, you know, and that never ends. That just keeps going and going and going. And so if you want examples of what I'm talking about, you look to a country like Portugal that said, okay, this punitive justice towards addicts isn't working, and it's actually causing the problems to get worse. We need to rezone or reclassify people who are addicts in the court systems from punitive justice and put them in the healthcare stream, you know, and start treating them like they're sick, which they are. They do suffer from a disease, right? If you look at the way the body works, it's like when people ingest sugar, they do it enough times, their body reacts and they become diabetics. Well, it's the same thing when people use a substance, they use it enough times to become addicted to it. Their body is malfunctioning and they're sick. They need medical help. We would never say to a diabetic, well, it's up to you, and stick them in jail because they're eating too much sugar. You know, it doesn't make any sense. So when you do that, that's a way into getting people better and getting the nation to care about them, right? But that's really a legislative problem with our justice system. And we need to really look at examples where there are high rates of rehabilitation and lower rates of recidivism over time. And Portugal's a good example. I think Norway is a good example. They're doing that now. And so, and then we have to decriminalize drugs, you know, and tax them, you know, like we're doing with marijuana. Those are huge revenues and what happens with that is rates of addiction lower, right? Because then it's not sexy, it's not taboo. So young people aren't drawn to it, right? When it's like, when there's prohibition, there's like an element of, you know, danger and all that stuff. And that, you know, for some reason is attractive for younger users. And so they know that this works, that like Portugal is again the example where it's lowered rates of addiction by huge amounts, right? And while you do that, if you legalize and tax, you also kill organized crime over time, right? Rates of crime and rates of recidivism go down along with it. And so I think Canada needs to do all those things to change the mindset of the public, instead of always thinking that we need to punish addicts and throw them in jail and think that that's going to work, because it's not very successful anywhere in the world.
Thank you for that. And that probably lends itself and draws from the work that you do with the homeless initiatives.
Yes. Yeah, I know all those statistics, and like I'm talking from a place of, I've done the research, you know. So
Right.
it's just, how do you sell that? How do you sell that to the public? You know, instead of, you know, there's an element of society that does want to punish people like that, that doesn't care, that thinks it's their fault, and not really looking at the structural analysis of, you know, how things actually work and, you know, what actually works to get people better. So.
And a number of the questions that are coming in from our audience are around how can we help? So I think just having this thinking in mind can certainly be a starting point for helping to change the narrative in the conversation.
Yeah, I guess the agency that each citizen possesses is that if they have a political party or hear of one that has these kind of platforms that they're willing to try out, then vote for those guys. You know, take a chance. Don't always go liberal or conservative or whatever you vote, you know.
Thank you. So I'm going to take a question that came from Catherine, and I'll read it to you, Jesse. The question is a statement also. Catherine says, I've been truly inspired by Jesse's book as a mature student. I struggled a lot as an undergrad, feeling out of place in each and every class I attended. I'm now in second year doing a master's, and I wonder how Jesse was able to navigate through his academic life. What tips would Jesse give for mature students?
So as a mature student who, I didn't understand a lot of the coded language that everybody uses, because everybody uses this very specific academic language. Just have to work at it. I know that's like old-fashioned elbow grease. I had to get up at 4:30 in the morning and sometimes read articles 3 and 4 times over to get them, especially like really dense, opaque academic literature. I had to just really work at it, you know, and make time. It was mainly about time management. You know, I put in like 12 to 16 hours a day nonstop. And I went to holidays and Christmases and stuff like that, especially everything before 2015. I was just completely dedicated to doing that. And I had to be, because, you know, other students are smarter. They had better literacy. They could write an essay faster than me. They didn't have to learn, you know, basically how to read and write again. And so, yeah, I just had to put in old-fashioned, consistent time management and get up early, like with the roosters, and just keep at it every day. Not lose hope, right? And not lose hope.
Right. That's really a key. And another question that's coming in from Trevor, who's actually asking how teachers can help. And so Trevor asks, how do you suggest teachers teach some of the Indigenous issues in their classrooms, especially as non-Indigenous educators?
The best teacher I ever had was Carolyn Podruchny. And like, I don't know what that woman is like. I don't know. She's so kind. And she I don't know. She just gives people the space to explore themselves, you know, and to really find their own interests, and then to capitalize on those interests, because those are their learning opportunities, right? She could see I didn't know who I was and that I didn't understand Indigenous history. So she's like, okay, let's look at your genealogical chart and look at your family history, and then I'll give you some reading material around those people that are actually in that chart that you're talking about. And so she used my own ego, I guess, and my own um, need to explore myself as a way into, you know, prairie history in the 20th century, Canadian history. And it made it way more interesting. And in doing that, that kept me more motivated than I would if I just took like standard Canadian history, you know, to 2500, you know. So yeah, she did that the whole way through. They allowed me basically to build my own undergrad around Indigenous history in the history department through Carolyn's supervision. And so a lot of that was one-on-one. A lot of it was like building a personal relationship with her as like a student and pupil and someone that needed to learn. And so, and I'm not the only person she does that with. She does that with like a lot of different Indigenous people, you know. And so, and she's a quote unquote settler or guest in these lands, and like she's doing things through an Indigenous methodology. It's about relationships, it's about trust, it's about like all those things that she does. And so literally the most important mentor I've ever had in my life is her. So you should ask her that question, because that was just my like what I can remember she was doing with me, you know.
Right, right. So, yeah, and you know, it's so important for some of the questions coming in about how to find success, that the importance of finding that mentor or that connection can really help us navigate as we're, you know, going through difficult things.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so now you're a teacher yourself. And as a teacher, you know, what do you bring to your classrooms? What do you bring to your students? How has your journey and that mentorship informed your teaching?
Well, my first class, I had a 3-hour class and I had to lecture, I thought for 3 hours. And so I wrote 3-hour lectures, and like I would read from my paper for 3 hours, and like everybody was asleep by the time I looked up. I'm like, this isn't working, you know? I don't have the skills to reach these students the way that Carolyn reached me. This is hard. This is way, way harder than I thought it would be. And so somewhere along, I don't know, it was like at the end of November, I'm just going to talk with my students about the readings and about the topics, because I know it already really well. I've lived it, a lot of the history that I teach. And so just talk to them and make that connection, you know, and you know, put yourself out there a little bit, right? Because people respond when you give part of your heart, then they will give part of their heart, right? There's no exchange. If you're not brave first, they're not going to be brave with you. And so I just did that. And by the end of the year, I had some pretty good student reports. I did really well. I thought I tanked, but like that approach was way better than me standing up and giving 3-hour lectures that nobody wanted to hear, that I didn't even want to give, really, you know. I didn't feel natural. And when I did the like open conversation, it wasn't like a seminar. I still had to teach them things, but like, yeah, that approach to connect and just create a relationship with the students works way better than the lecturing the old school way, you know. So
I do, I do get that, and yet it can be so much harder, right, to put your heart on the line and take that risk. You talked about heartbreak and you know the hearts you've broken and hearts that have been broken. So that's a real risk to put yourself out there in front of a you know a larger class.
oh yeah, it is. And yeah, I thought I would be judged, and probably I was, but they didn't voice their opinion. But like then the other people that were really invested in it with me, they had beautiful conversations, and things got really like passionate. They could see their eyes light up, and they, you know, got really interested, and they started relating it with their own experiences. And that's when you know some people are really learning, because they're saying, oh, I something similar like this happened to my people, and I can understand because we went through British colonialism and whatnot. So
Right. And I can see as I'm reading the questions that are coming in from the 99 people who are sitting and participating in this session, we can't see you, but we can feel that our audience is with us, and the word that keeps resonating is how much your story is inspiring them. What does it feel like for your journey to be an inspiration to so many?
Scary. I didn't know. I didn't think anybody was going to read my book. Right? It's so like I don't know. When you tell your truth, it's a very specific Métis story. There's universals in it that people recognize in their own lives, and so yeah, I'm glad that I give people hope in some or inspire them in some way. But like, really, I was just a guy trying not to die first, and then just trying to keep my girlfriend around and like holding down a job and like, keeping that promise to my grandmother. So I don't take any credit. I was just trying to do my best and be better than I was yesterday.
One of the questions coming in from Niakel, as you talk about your grandmother and Lucy, your wife, Niakel asks, which family member had the most positive impact on your recovery? And maybe you could share what a family member can do, to help in that journey and to be with you and enable you to feel that connection.
There were three of them, really. When I was in rehab, my mom tracked me down at Harvest House, and getting to know her, I don't know, it was like my heart filled with light again in a way. I don't know. Like I was a pretty bad guy for a while. And so, but it was all attached to not knowing my mom and my dad and stuff. And so when she came back into my world, I was like, hey, I can do this, I can get better, and it's been hard. It hasn't been easy getting to know her. She's got a lot of her own issues. And then my grandmother is I think my protector, even though she never got to see me sober or out of treatment or anything that's happened now. She only saw me as the messed up kid that I was, but she still believed in me. She did. She never gave up on me. She was one of the only people that really believed in me, and my grandfather stopped her from seeing me for many years. And so I didn't have that connection. So we made amends at the end there with my grandma. It meant the world to me, and it gave me purpose. She was the one I made that promise to get my education. And then at the end of it, my grandfather, on his deathbed, he was a really tough, stubborn old man. He'd lived through the Depression, hands like catcher's mitts because he worked hard his whole life, like forearms like Popeye, literally. And I'd never seen him soft like that, and he just, we made amends, and I apologized to him. And I was always resentful towards him because he used to hit us and make us work so hard. But he told me that he did that because he had lost his dad, and it was work really that his grandfather had taught to him that allowed him to survive the Depression. And so my grandfather was actually that was his way to love us. And that was the first time I really understood that. And so in making amends right before he died, it released me, and I had forgiveness, real forgiveness for the first time in many years. And it liberated me, and, I'm glad I did. I'm glad I got the chance to make amends.
It's harder to make amends than not to. And, we have a question that Sean is asking with regards to publishing your book. Did you have to go back to family members and others, to get permission to share stories that had to do with them in your book? How did that work?
Yeah. I had to talk to my brother. I had Josh. I read him his parts, and I had to get his permission. I read Jerry his parts, and I got a verbal permission from Jerry. Read my mom her parts, and we cried together on the phone. So yeah, the people that are in it that I could talk to, I got permission. And legally, Simon and Schuster wouldn't have published the book if the main characters, I had to get permission from each one. And so, yeah, that was difficult, right? Because I had to show them how I perceived history and what had happened. And in a lot of ways, it was different than what they had perceived. And so some conflicting, some similar memories about the same things. So, but that's part of the process.
Right. we're certainly grateful that you went through that process and chose to share your story and your journey with our community and with the world. And we're very excited to see the mini-series and read your next books. A lot of comments coming in were about how excited we are about that. So unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our hour, and I feel like time has really flown. And we are so grateful to you for being here. Are there any final thoughts or messages that you want to leave with the York community before we part ways?
Yeah, I just want to thank York for being one of my homes, you know, and for like really giving me a shot, you know, and looking past a lot of my history and seeing me as the person I am today. You know, that's important, right? To believe in second chances and to actually put yourself out there and be accepted in a place like York is incredible. Like Tendania, what's the thing? Like the way must be tried. I remember looking at that. That's the motto of York University. And like, I hold that in my heart. I eventually will get that tattooed on my arm because you guys actually make that happen for a lot of people. So thank you.
Oh, wonderful. We are so delighted that you are here. Thank you for being with us today and for sharing so generously of yourself. And we look forward to what your future holds. And thank you to Lucy, who's been a wonderful partner in helping to organize this and always responsive and positive. So please thank her on our behalf. And we are honored that you're both part of the alumni community and the community in general. Dean Joy Kirshner, thank you so much for partnering with us on this special event. We very much appreciate the work that your team does for York and for being here today. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you. Thank you, Jesse. It was inspiring.
Thank you.
So before we say goodbye to our audience, we want to thank everyone for being here today. I'll let Jesse and Joy turn off their cameras, and thank you both. Wish you a wonderful rest of your day. It's been a true pleasure and honor. And for our audience who's here, we have one last poll question. This gives us a sense of whether this event has been something that you've enjoyed and whether it can inform what other kinds of events that we should do in the future. So a poll is about to appear on your screen, and the question is, would you recommend the event that you've just experienced to a friend? So if you're using Zoom, please use please answer on the screen, and if you're joining us on Facebook, please respond using the comment section. Wow. Well, you all read my mind. This was certainly a most wonderful way to spend an hour, and so many of you have additional stories that you started to write in, and thank you all for your questions and for your engagement and for your connection to the university and to Jesse's book and to the story. We hope you're enjoying the virtual book club. For those of you who are reading, I've just voted on what my next read choice, and it looks like we have a really close competition. So if you haven't voted on what your next read will be and you're part of the book club, please vote, because yeah, we are close. This talk was recorded, so if you enjoyed it and would like to revisit any of the conversation or to share it with others, please feel free to find it on our YouTube channel. It's on the York Alumni YouTube channel. We invite you also to join our LinkedIn group or follow us on Facebook by searching York University Alumni. We're also on Instagram and Twitter and everywhere you might want to look online. We always appreciate your feedback, so please feel free to reach out to alumni@yorku.ca if you have any ideas, comments, or thoughts that you'd like to share with the alumni team. And I wish you a wonderful afternoon. Thank you all. Be safe, be healthy, enjoy the rest of the summer, and be well.